I have come to an understanding that the measure of masculinity is by man's worst behavior and never the sacrifice nor the sweat he puts into building the world as we see it and benefit from. While the measure of femininity is by how best she can claim her victimhood and demand fair compensation for her mere existence in almost every area of life. This is Vasu Ericsson, and you're listening to Vasu Ericsson Audio Files. And to the listeners, let me take a moment to highlight that June is actually Men's Mental Health Month. Make sure to check on the men in your life and give them some extra love and care. Couple of weeks ago, I finally got to watch Aavesham and felt that it was really testosterone reassuring. I was catching up with the reviews, analysis, and the rest of the videos and came across Film Companion's Anupama Chopra's interview with Fahad Fazil. She had asked him a peculiar question. Why was there no sight of any prominent woman character in the film? For a woman of her stature and given her experience in the cine field, that line of question seemed extremely stupid. In one corner of my mind, I wanted Fahad to reject the premise and turn the question down like Tarantino did many years ago and point out to her how dumb she is. I even wondered why did she stop there? Why did she not ask the questions such as why does the film not have a female Chowdhury music director from Vijayawada? Why is there no Dalit trans man as the lead actor? Why is there no sight of trans Menans or trans Nayars? I mean, come on, where is the line, Anupama? Are you still upset that you or your minions like the Tyagi girl couldn't take down Sandeep Reddy Vanga or his success of Animal and are channelizing your hatred of him through asking such silly questions to every other man you come across? Anyways, I thought this was an isolated incident, and since Avesham is a huge blockbuster hit from all over with unanimous positive responses, until I started to see the same verbose emerging from different corners. One such is film companion Sagar doing a video essay titled Misogyny in Mass Telugu Cinema, with puny complaints such as women are stereotyped and referred to as item numbers, a term that has been widely used to address a woman featuring in a sensual and upbeat songs for special appearances in a film. I don't know why it doesn't occur to them that these women signed their contracts all by themselves with no gun to their heads and are totally happy to objectify themselves as long as they're being paid for it. More on this for later topics, but I really hope you get the idea. Now, getting back to Avesham, there was another article written by S.R. Praveen, a journalist from Kerala, titled Invisible and Forgettable Missing Women of Malayalam Cinema, with outright idiotic assertions that women are either being written in an objectifying manner or not written at all. While I can't obviously speak on everyone's behalf of what's a well written female character and what's not, there is an interesting aspect of this concern being raised and the manner in which those are being presented. We will now explore how the success of male centered films like Avesham, Manjummel Boys, etc., is being misunderstood and deliberately misrepresented, and why we need more of such films. Here's some highlights of Praveen's salty tears from the article that try to incite additional fear and hatred of men. Quote, women characters in Avesham are only stereotypes, that of the mother and that of a sex worker. There's a trend of women being invisibilized from Malayalam cinema. While women characters in Malayalam cinema till 2010, with a few exceptions like the films of KG George, were seen through the eyes of patriarchy and were expected to be submissive and chaste, the films that came in the 2010s broke these unwritten but widely followed norms. End quote. You will even witness the massive failure in the firing of his neurons when you reach this section. Quote, although it is clear that there is no evil machine working in the background to ensure such a scenario, the fact that so many filmmakers would think that women characters are dispensable points to a problem. End quote. This is where he repeatedly shoots himself in the foot and proceeds to bring up the demands to be met by the male patriarchal heads of Malayalam cinema. Here are those. Quote, the demand certainly is not for virtuous women characters, but roles with positive, negative, or grey shades that would at least leave some kind of an impression. To improve women's safety and security in Malayalam cinema. Representation for women in mainstream cinema often depends on the whims and fancies of men who form a majority of the writers and filmmakers in Malayalam cinema. We are in the middle of a season of scant representation, a state of affairs not very encouraging for the many women waiting to break into the industry in front of and behind the camera. End quote. Does it mean that once these demands are met, women would excel incredibly well and outdo men in delivering blockbuster hits back to back? There's lot many things to unpack here. Section 1. First thing to notice is the classic feminist toolkit. In the guise of raising concerns, Praveen has set the perfect false premise like any other feminist would. Take a problem, highlight the issues faced only by women, ignore the working conditions for men, blame men for centuries long imagined oppression of women, justify the accusations based on meager proof, demand solution from the oppressors. It's almost as if only women are owed this level of safety, protection, provision, and rescue from tougher conditions in life only by those men who they continue to treat as disposable and oppressive class. And what's really hypocritical is the way women think it is the duty of other men to facilitate these working conditions when they continue to portray themselves as strong and independent all over their social media handles and would even go to the lengths of saying, we don't need men. Okay, moving on. In order to further demonstrate how feminist toolkit is used, let's take a look at these instances. 1 in 4 homeless people are women. You will notice that an issue, homelessness, is presented. Female gender and their victimhood are highlighted. Male gender and their victimhood are downplayed, all happening at the same time. Another powerful example to demonstrate these manipulations is by observing the way Boko Haram was reported. Boko Haram gained popularity around 2014 when the media started reporting that many girls, around 300, have been kidnapped by terrorists whose agenda was allegedly to deny education to girls. This prompted international outrage, including many celebrities and even the then First Lady Michelle Obama with the hashtags Bring Back Our Girls. Several years later, researchers found the following. They examined newspaper articles in Boko Haram's gendered crimes reported from July 2013 to Feb 2021 with a focus on the relative visibility of the gender of the victims. They pointed out that almost all media and newspapers reported the news with an exclusive focus on women and children. The media failed to mention that Boko Haram, a terrorist organization, was actually against every form of Western influence in Nigeria and that both boys and girls were kidnapped. While the number of kidnapped girls were around 300, an actual number of 10,000 boys were abducted and victimized as well. And whenever there was a boy victim, the newspapers masked the gender and presented it as, for example, 25 girls and several other villagers. When females are the victims, their gender got automatically highlighted and garnered a lot of support. Simultaneously, even males got their gender highlighted, but only as the terrorists, kidnappers, or abductors. The research also stated that failure to report the gendered nature of the massacres may contribute to lower awareness and thus reduced security resourcing needed to address such severe human rights violations. Similar reporting can be found in other areas. Take the scenario where male rape victims were forced to pay child support. This is an excerpt from 2014. He learned 8 years later that he is a father to the child born out of that rape by women, but the state wants him to pay the child support. USA Today pointed out that this case illustrates a legal double standard. When a state government finds out a 14-year-old girl is a statutory rape victim of a 20-year-old man, the common reaction would be to file criminal charges to put the predator in jail. But for the male victims, child support laws turn state governments into allies of abusers instead of advocates for the victims. The real question is how many people, media, and newspapers voiced their support in favor of the male rape victim and demanded severe legal action against the female perpetrator. Do you see a pattern of invisibilization of addressing concerns when the victims are male? Keep this in mind and we will analyze what exactly this pattern is called in the later section, along with specific examples within the Kerala state. Journalists like Praveen project the false notion that only women are the ones facing issues disproportionately at the hands of patriarchy. And therefore, it is a rightful demand to expect men to fix the issue and make the industry a safe space for women, since men are the ones with full power and at the top of the hierarchy. His compassion to be the strong, responsible voice to highlight and speak up for women, like any other noble white knight, is the devil in disguise here. Not because he's highlighting the concern, but because how much information he's withholding from the general public. This is what constitutes the dishonesty radiating from each section of his article. The following are the pointers that I want the audience to pay attention to. The advocacy is majorly limited to women in front of the camera. The journalist has listed out so many problems that women have and how men are responsible, but why then he did not list out the limitations that these women inherently have? Or probably the lack of interest for women to work in areas that require tremendous amount of physical strength and endurance despite having the best story, script and the team. If you think I'm lying, look around and see how many women occupy hard jobs in general, such as working in coal mines, oil rigs, sewage cleaning, etc. Isn't that clear already? Because what seems to be happening here is that his laughably low range advocacy highlights only certain areas of filmmaking that would enable him and people like Anupama to point fingers at the evil men and the patriarchy. If he were to attempt to extend his white knighting towards the tougher areas of filmmaking, his advocacy will almost instantly come to a logical dead end. When he went as far as acknowledging that there was no evil machine, why not consider the simplest reason that men as a group are easier to work with and can adapt to difficult environments without further complications and are probably just having a great time by themselves? I sincerely cannot imagine a bunch of women taking up these Herculean tasks and filming a movie like Manjummel Boys or a fantastic thriller like the 1972 movie Deliverance without any help from men. That's because there is no such expectation from the audience that women should do the same stuff as men to prove their worth, nor should this be considered an indirect mockery of their inability. By refusing to address these aspects clearly, these demands for special accommodations for women seems to be nothing but virtue signaling for artificial advantages. The advantages that serve no purpose other than to satisfy their feminist ego and write another article about finally achieving the true representation of women. It only highlights Praveen's, Sagar's, and Anupama Chopra's Neolithic incompetence in film journalism, whose ultimate goal is to set a criteria and a morally superior standpoint from which they will judge the success or failure of a film based on superficial factors such as mere presence or absence of a woman's role in a film, irrespective of whether such a character is necessary for the script that is decided by the storyteller. This is what happens when you take Bechdel test seriously. Okay, okay. Now, let's give the solution to that women's invisibility, shall we? First of all, this is 2024. All equipment is available and everyone has ease of access. Those who have issues, they can quit the film industry and form an all female club, starting with Parvati. Carry the film equipment all by themselves and make movies. Prove it to the audience that even females can do large blockbuster films on par with their male counterparts, set in the most difficult to shoot areas with never before seen stunts. Keep maintaining your success rate for at least 4 decades. You see where I'm going? The catch here is that even if women quit the industry this very instant, nothing will happen. Men can still continue to make films and deliver quality work. But you see, I'm stating all this not because men have special privileges. It's for the simplest reasons that men love having fun and doing this epic shit. They just gather around, think about a crazy, unachievable, life threatening idea, and decide to make it happen only for the fact that it's fucking cool. Most people don't know that this is a form of socialization and a therapy in disguise for men. Taking up tasks and channeling their energy into something they find it meaningful, forming a strong bond with other males and turn that into their productive or recreational space. I mean, take all the risky sports, for example, or the stupid pranks, or the movies by Johnny Knoxville. How about the reason that these are the large scale activities that men love just doing it? And they simply happen to be predominantly male interest areas. Now, am I saying no women can achieve this? Absolutely not. Only some women seem to engage in these crazy spaces. But what feminism tells you is that it's the patriarchy that's denying entry into these spaces, which is absolutely bullshit. Why not call it male interest areas instead of male dominated areas? But then their advocacy and outrage would turn out to be nothing but bogus, wouldn't it? Now, some may even flip the script on me and say similar things like if men are really concerned about men's issues, even they can build their own domestic abuse shelters. But, darling, look up what happened to late Earl Silverman and how he attempted to build domestic abuse shelters for men in Canada after his personal experience, and how feminists snatched that away from him, and how he ultimately succumbed to suicide. Or look up what happened to Erin Pidgey. She was responsible for the first ever domestic abuse shelter for women. Later, when she pointed out to the public that even men face domestic violence and that women can be abusive too, All the feminists threatened and intimidated her, after which she was forced to leave the country and move elsewhere. Or look up how Supreme Court of India responded to when a petition was filed to form Men's Rights Commission, and how it turned down the request despite the alarming suicide rates of several tens of thousands of men. This indicates that men and boys are actually the ones with the diminished privileges in the society, which is quite opposite to what Praveen paints. The second important thing to unpack here is understanding how male spaces work. Allow me to tell you a short story that happened a decade ago when I was in college. It was the time of our college fest. The classes were dismissed, all our friends gathered at a spot. We had both men and women in our group, and we shared really good bond. But something interesting happened when a relatively better looking female student from an outside college, who's a friend of the girls from our gang, came to meet us briefly. Suddenly, one of my male friends and my demeanor changed. What was a normal atmosphere until then became a competitive one, and also immediately. We had even started making jokes at each other's expense, and we would even make sharp, long eye contact with this new female, and occasionally and shamelessly create an opportunity to take a glance at her visible cleavage every 6 seconds. It went to an extent where we would give heightened responses for her simple and ordinary questions. One of our friends even captured that moment unknown to us, where one can easily grasp that my male friend and I were clearly attracted to this new female, and we were trying to outcompete each other on who gets to win her approval and impress her the most. Shortly after she left, the situation came back to normal, and our friends shared a good laugh, indirectly hinting how they all noticed it and how stupid we both looked, the embarrassment of which I still carry to this day. Looking back, I understand it better what exactly happened. And with the world becoming increasingly feminized in almost every field, let's talk about male spaces, why they are necessary, and what happens when a female is introduced into these spaces. We have to recognize and acknowledge that biologically and emotionally, men and women are different, and there are very specific male interest areas. Men tend to regulate emotions through actions rather than words. When boys and men engage in male only spaces, there is an exchange of skills, values, and virtues in an environment that ensures the development of the boys and men into an able, secure, and responsible masculine by learning group dynamics that in turn teaches them how to build, support, and protect communities based on male brotherhood and loyalty. This always served an important function of male socialization that can also be found in even smaller settings, such as between a father and a son. What many people don't understand is that such socialization also serves as a mechanism that facilitates men to channel their emotions in a way that is typically preferred by them. That is why, when a man talks about how he successfully changed a tire, cracked a mathematical formula after locking himself up in his room for several days to focus on his task, practiced shadow boxing with another male friend, fixed the broken engine of a car, or in this context, made films with his male friends with an idea that they all seem to find mutual excitement in, he might be actually sharing a strategy of how successfully he redirected his feeling of purposelessness in life and turned that into something positive that helped build his character and potentially a successful career. Perhaps we should all learn to understand this masculine aspect and treat such natural male expressions with more attention. For many men, these activities are the preferred canvases on which they can process feelings and carve out some genuine psychological equilibrium. Male activities like these provide a symbolic canvas on which men project and then work through various scenarios of real life. And that is why modern therapies essentially and evidently doesn't work on men, because it expects men to be vulnerable, to talk their feelings out and cry, which is basically forcing men to emote like women. This is probably a reason why men talk so much about work, sports, building things, computer games, recreational activities. It may be their preferred way of communicating the ways they wrestle with psychological issues. In all the male spaces, they have a common purpose: self development, male bonding, and to simply enjoy group activities who are not at all worried about winning approval from a pretty face. And whenever a female is introduced, That purpose now shifts to facilitating an environment that a female finds acceptable and willing to participate in. That also deceptively introduces a feminine social frame that judges men and their ability to facilitate that environment she is seeking. It is at that moment men's intrasexual competitiveness and white knighting instincts kick in that eventually interrupts the intimacy and disrupts the male bonding. One way to notice that is how men drop the use of profanities, rude or harsh language in the presence of a woman, which they otherwise do not have a problem freely using in her absence. When male spaces are expected to include females, and when such a goal is achieved, what was once an enjoyable gathering with a common purpose now automatically turns into a space of reproductive competition. Because of this, men would even end up going to the extent of betraying their friendships just to stand out and subconsciously seek every possibility of winning the intimacy lottery with the introduced female. When this process of male bonding and learning are disrupted, masculine development comes to a halt. Feminists mislead the general public by saying that the goal of this introduction of feminine imperative is simply to achieve the true equality and break the gender barrier. But most of the time, the intention is never to truly contribute to these spaces, but instead to make it about themselves, saying, I've become the first woman in an all male space, and use non existent historical oppression of women in the past as a justification to discriminate men and claim all the traditionally masculine spaces for themselves and show it off as an achievement in smashing the patriarchy and breaking the glass ceiling.
What we need more female CEOs. We need more women sitting in boards because those are the gatekeepers. We need the keys that unlock those doors. And once those women are there, don't just be happy, then feel so lucky that you're the only woman sitting at the table. Get 3 men to get up, get their seats, and put 3 women in there.
If achieving equality is indeed a true goal, why don't we see them talking about it when men are facing issues disproportionately? For example, this. Most women and feminized men don't understand nor recognize the complexity and the need for male only working environments. Instead, they project the false notion that a patriarchal mindset is why men are obsessed with work and their hobbies, and that men, mostly intentionally and sometimes unintentionally, exclude and block women from workplaces, subjugating and restricting them to domestic chores and further reduce them to slaves so that men can maintain the male domination. They also falsely claim that this is why women and their issues remain invisible to this day. Furthermore, they even allege that men may not be consciously aware that they are brainwashed by this patriarchy and that a feminine imperative is the cure to this corrupted thinking, which would unchain us from all evil patriarchal spell and eventually make all lives of men and women equal and happier. This kind of narrative is how male spaces are systematically targeted and exploited. Having understood the significance of male spaces, why don't these journalists consider the possibility that the existence of films like Aavesham, Manjummel Boys, etc., is simply a manifestation and celebration of positive masculinity and productive male spaces? I would even go on to say that these films must be under no obligation to forcefully include a female character just because it checks the boxes of Praveen's and Anupama Chopra's diversity, equity, and inclusion standards, the standards which I call the stipulations of the stupid kind. If you still think that the hypothesis and analysis I presented is wrong, let's use a quick example from the real world. Take a look at Kathleen Kennedy. She took over Lucasfilm, turned Star Wars, a typically male franchise, into a female franchise. When fans pointed out how the quality of the Star Wars is lost, she now blames men and terms it as toxic masculinity. Instead of serving the audience, she blamed the audiences, never herself. What a pathetic bitch. Now, I'll be playing a clip of a person that most people hate and may find it triggering to listen to. I'm certainly not a fan, but he definitely has a point when he mentions this.
I don't like traveling the world with women. I think it's one of the most frustrating things a man can possibly do.
Why?
Okay, imagine you had to travel around the world and you had to take a 3-year-old with you. You'd be like, oh, now you go, where's my 3-year-old? Has it 8? I have to make sure they're safe. Got to bring all their stuff. It's exactly the same with a chick. Me and my brother, we're Spartan, right? We can just go, rock up at an airport. There's no flight for 11 hours, sleep in the airport terminal, don't eat, don't sleep, one bag on our back, old school soldiers. We don't care. With a chick, it's all, I need food, I need water, where's my stuff? My case is 55 kilo. I forgot this foundation, I need to find this foundation. It's horrible.
How about the possibility that women can be a burden just by existing in male spaces and ruin a pleasant experience? I will let you stay triggered in case you fail to grasp the core point in what I'm trying to highlight. And finally, we arrive at section 3. Earlier, I asked you to remember the pattern seen in the reporting of Boko Haram and male rape victims requiring to pay child support. Consider two more scenarios. The first one, reporting of domestic violence. Media often highlights how difficult the situation is for women, but it doesn't report the fact that domestic violence is actually bidirectional in most cases, and that the domestic violence against men is not even legally recognized in India despite tons of evidence. Second one, media talks about how women are always the primary victims of rape and how male perpetrators need to be strictly punished. But the same media won't highlight the fact that the definitions of rape, stalking, etc. are completely one sided and only addresses male to female perpetration and doesn't even acknowledge female to male perpetration. That is, when women force men to penetrate. So the statistics of male victims and female abusers are not even captured. In the same manner, you can also identify this bias in the relative outrage of the general public when it comes to the male victims and female victims of the same crime. I mean, how many times have you seen people marching on the roads demanding change in the laws when men are raped by women? One of the best ways to explain this is by the term gamma bias, a testable concept brought forward by UK psychologists Martin James Seeger and Dr. John Barry. Gamma bias is a phenomenon of cognitive distortion that occurs while perceiving a gender and their experience, particularly male gender. This can be best explained by making observations of its occurrence under following contexts. When it comes to females, their victimhood and achievements are highlighted. Their perpetration, failings, and privileges are masked and minimized. This is evident in the over enthusiastic, overflowing concern, compassion, and empathy for female victims in the reportings of any crime or while generating awareness, and no display of such concern for male victims of the same crime. For example, we can always refer Boko Haram scenario. When it comes to males, their perpetration, failings, and privileges are highlighted. Their victimhood, achievements, and contributions are downplayed, minimized, and masked. Take the example of how media reports male victims of rape. Notice the willful hesitation to mention that an adult female raped a young boy, and instead they minimized the severity of the crime by using the words such as sexual relationship or sexual misconduct, which in turn lowers the visibility and awareness required to highlight the seriousness of male victimhood and female perpetration. Another example is how feminists and media highlight the male privileges under certain scenarios like pay gap, which has been debunked several times, but absolutely fail to highlight the absence of male privileges when it comes to male reproductive rights, parental alienation of fathers, family code bias, and the inherent empathy gap, while simultaneously hiding the fact that women are actually more privileged in many areas of life. Here are some 50 privileges I listed out that women exclusively enjoy at the expense of men. Do you at least now see how the issues of men and boys are being invisibilized, relatively speaking? What feminism has been massively successful at is to deliberately inject and encourage the gamma bias. That is, by highlighting gender only under these circumstances: female victims, male perpetrators, female achievements, male failings, and male privileges, but neutralizes or downplays the gender under these circumstances: male victims, female perpetrators, male achievements, female failings, and female privileges. When such distorted perceptions are constantly fed and taken for granted, the relations between men and women get even more fractured. This bias will make general public blind to the actual reality that more help than harm comes from men and boys. Remember when there was a man named Baiju Raju who committed suicide and left a video note blaming his wife for the emotional abuse she caused when he found out that she cheated on him? Danya Rajendran from the News Minute dismissed his cry for help and painted him as a weak man who can't handle women's hypergamy with an underlying theme that men are not owners of women's sexuality. But when a woman was found to have killed a child, she downplayed the severity of the woman's crime and instead highlighted that the woman was a victim of her own postpartum psychosis. This is where we can notice her biased attempt to evoke sympathy from the public since the gender of the perpetrator is female. If she wanted to talk about the actual medical reasons, Danya Rajendran might as well have mentioned the role of darker maternal phenomenon called as Munchausen syndrome by proxy that contributed to the infanticide, don't you think? Apply the same principle to women's studies programs and estimate how many women across the world are being manipulated into thinking that men are the enemy. If Malayalam film industry is really blind to women's issues like Praveen claims, what prompted the filmmakers of these films to highlight a warning that says violence against women is punishable? Shouldn't the warning be violence against anyone is punishable? There was also news that talked about how even boys in Kerala are being sexually abused at young age. I don't remember seeing the card violence against boys is strictly punishable under the law before the start of any Malayalam film. What makes adult female victims of any crime more qualified than young male rape victims? What exactly was the criteria on which it was decided to show only violence against women is punishable? I will tell you why. It is because of lack of empathy and gamma bias. While the victims are male and unfortunately the perpetrators are also male, the focus shifted to male perpetration. This made male victims invisible. Where is the same ambition, enthusiasm, and commitment by these very journalists like Praveen and Dhanya Rajendran to call out Malayalam filmmakers when they failed to acknowledge young male rape victims? What else is required to collectively agree and acknowledge the invisibilization of boys and men's issues? In my view, violence against anyone should be considered seriously, irrespective of the frequency of the crime and gender of the perpetrator. So here's my final thoughts. Whenever you see someone use this feminist toolkit, highlight only one gender and never the whole issue, feel free to tell them that it automatically disqualifies the validity of their claims because they can never withstand logical dissection and fair inquiry from a gender neutral and empirical lens. When people like Anupama Chopra and Praveen use these subtle shaming tactics and guilt people into writing women into the stories, it only creates artificially elevated importance for women. Do not mistake their intellectual laziness for righteous advocacy or journalistic integrity. So, Avesham rocks. If anything, I encourage all the budding filmmakers to take this approach and make films with your male friends with a story that has only male characters, that explores all the degrees of male experience for the male audience, free from any feminine influence. Nothing wrong. Do not let the political correctness, illogical DEI standards, or the feminine imperative dilute your idea, nor discourage you from doing what you love just because you have a story that these feminist critics and journalists might not approve of since it doesn't align with their own brand of activism. And this is my message for the DEI overlords. Next time you see projects like Avesham happening back to back, keep your mouths and hands to yourselves and let the boys have fun. We are really tired of people like you brewing up imaginary hate that continues to create more divide between men and women and acting like you speak on behalf of all victimized women, if they truly are. Before we exit, remember what Camille Paglia said, the part at least where she got it right. If civilization had been left in female hands, we'd be still living in grass huts. Thank you for listening. Do share your thoughts in the comments section below. We'll see you in the next video.